beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Going to be dealing with a lot of news to deal with government technology. Of course, we all know about net neutrality. If you haven't heard by now, they did pass FCC net neutrality regulation. We'll get into that, but something that hasn't really been talked about for a while is the NSA, PRISM, and all, the metadata storage, and the capacity that they have. We'll get into some of the tech companies too a little bit after we get into the NSA. We're going to start off with the NSA, but we'll feed into some of the tech companies, how like Google basically has mass server capacities that they basically kind of act as NSA in a way, but we've been most people have been willfully ignorant to the fact of what Google was doing with your permission. But we'll get into a little bit of everything. Also leading into net neutrality, plenty of news on that. But back to the NSA thing, when you look at it, it's something that now we all know it's going on. People got mad. Nothing happened. People are mad but not raising a fuss anymore. It's kind of one of those things. We'll just let them get mad and see how long they'll be mad. Well, they're still mad, but they're not yelling at us anymore. This is the issue that should still be like, the NSA servers are still running. There's a problem here. This was a topic brought up at this year's CPAC 2015. And Judge Andrew Napolitano and Michael Hayden spoke, and they had a debate here. And I'm going to play the judges first, and then I'm going to get into Michael Hayden. And in between, going to talk about it. Let's go ahead and just cue that up right now.
Before most of you were born, I was present at the first CPAC in the Madison Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. There were 25 people there, one of whom was a guy named Ronald Reagan. When I speak on privacy and security, I often start out like this. I want everybody to take their BlackBerry, iPhone, Android, whatever you have in your pocket, and turn it on, because I want President Obama and the NSA to be able to hear everything I'm about to tell you. Of course, this is not a laughing matter, because they will hear everything I'm about to tell you whether you turn this on or not, because they have the ability to turn this on without you knowing about it, without going to a judge and getting a court order for your cell phone. They can listen to everything you say and read everything you write. How did we get there? My gosh, we have the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States to protect the quintessentially American right of the right to be left alone. The reason we have this amendment is because the framers and the founders found intolerable the concept of the British use of general warrants. A general warrant was an order from a secret court in London authorizing the bearer of the warrant to search where he wanted and to seize whatever he found. We fought a revolution so that general warrants would not come here, and we wrote a constitution so that the new government here could not do to us what the British had done to us as colonists. And in order to assure that, we put the Fourth Amendment in the Constitution, which says you have the right to be left alone in your persons, houses, papers, and effects. And if the government needs to assault your privacy in your persons, houses, papers, and effects, it must go to a judge and present evidence of probable cause about you. Not about everybody in your zip code or your area code, but about you. Quote, specifically describing the place to be searched or the person to be seized. This applies whenever the government wants to search or seize, whether it's for criminal purposes, tax purposes, intelligence purposes, or whether because they just want to know what you are doing. Fast forward to today. The secret courts that our forefathers fought against in the Revolution are here in Washington, D.C. So secret that the judges on the courts have been sworn to secrecy. So secret that the judges on the courts are not permitted to keep copies of their own records. So secret that if you knew about it, you would say, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, because these are general warrants that authorize the NSA to listen wherever they want and take copies of the content to whatever they listen to. We've come 180 degrees from fighting a war against those who would violate with impunity our right to be left alone, to hiring public servants who will do that to us. We are in a twilight era where freedom is diminishing because, with the exception of people in this room, there is very little outrage. No matter how grievous the violation of constitutional liberty, if there is no outrage, the government will continue to do it. General Hayden will tell you, and in my view, General Hayden is a patriot whose entire career has been devoted to defending the country. General Hayden will tell you when he speaks that the line between privacy and security can be moved by him. not by the court, but by him or whoever his successor is in the NSA. There is no principle of law. There is no constitutional principle. There is no Supreme Court ruling that moves that line, because your right to be left alone is a natural and personal right. Only you can give it up. The majority cannot take it away from you, and certainly American spies cannot take it away from you. I hope after this morning, you'll be outraged.
Very good. General Hayden.
Okay. Judge, it's beginning to feel like an away game.
Okay. Now, when he talks about the fact that, you know, they can turn your phone on whether you turn it on or not. It's basically saying that they have full access to it. When they store metadata, that's collecting information. That's going through your trash can. That's going through your house while you're away. Well, we're not looking at it. We're just putting it in a bag, and we're not analyzing any of it. We just put all the stuff in a bag and put it on an evidence shelf with your name on it. That way, if we hear a crime was committed in your area, we can go look through your stuff and make sure, well, there's no DNA of that missing person or something. It's the same concept. Now, whether they're looking at it or turning your phone on and listening to you, they may not be doing that right now. But the capability is there. The back doors are there. And no matter, you know, if the person that's in charge at the NSA right now is actually caring about people's privacy, does not mean that the next person is going to actually care. And when the capabilities are there and the government works with big companies to have that ability, when you have NSA storing everybody's metadata, basically, that's what you have now. So, you know, the simple fact, well, you know, are they doing it? It doesn't matter if they're doing it. They put everything in play to be able to try to use things against you. And then you take on the simple fact that they say that every person out there commits at least 3 crimes a day or something, 3 felonies a day or something like that. When they're saving everything on you, doesn't that give them a tool to silence whoever they want? Oh, you're giving us trouble. Let me flip through here. Oh, you did this on this day, and you did this on that day, and you did this on that day. Oh, those are 3 strikes. All those were felonies. And, well, we got the evidence right here. So, yeah, you're going to prison. And with things like the little secret detention out in Chicago, I tend to believe that to be something of a testing out of things like NDAA and being able to detain people. Well, you know, it just now became big, even though there's been people out there that's, you know, it's a big thing among lawyers now that, you know, if you can't find them in a precinct and, you know, they were detained, and arrested, then they must be there. We could see a lot of issues coming up. And all of this will even come into play when we get further on in the broadcast here. So let's go ahead and play Michael Hayden. I'm going to let him play, and I think it goes back to Andrew real quick, Judge Napolitano. So we'll go ahead and play it through here.
For me here. If NSA were even capable of doing what the judge has just outlined for you, having a debate here today, there would be nothing to argue about. Let's talk about reality. Let's talk about facts. The judge is an unrelenting libertarian.
Now, before this next part plays, just listen to the crowd after Michael Hayden makes this comment. It's pretty funny.
So am I. And I'm an unrelenting libertarian who's also responsible for 4 decades of his life for another important part of that document, the part that says, provide for the common defense. Let's talk about specifics. Right after 9/11, the Congress of the United States had something called the Joint Inquiry Commission. It was an unusual body. It was a combined House, Senate, Intelligence Committee inquiry into what went wrong on 9/11. One of the most telling aspects of the document they came out with, we had a shorthand for it called the JIC report, that NSA, I was the head at the time, NSA was far too conservative when it came to the most important kind of terrorist communications there could be. Terrorist communications, one end of which was in the United States. And so our charge from your elected representatives, and actually from the president, was be better able to respond to that kind of threat. Now, there are tools available to us, but we understood the Constitution. And so we looked for the gentlest approach possible, the one that would squeeze American privacy the least in terms of responding to that particular charge. How do you detect terrorist communications entering or leaving the homeland? Because after all, we had just been attacked from the homeland. We hit upon metadata. Metadata defined as information about a communication, a call, to, from, when, how long. Despite what the judge said about writs of assistance and constitutional protections, the controlling legal authority with regard to metadata is Smith versus Maryland, 1979, in which the Supreme Court held 5-3 that metadata is not constitutionally protected. And we therefore struck upon metadata again as the gentlest way in which we could balance the two demands of our Constitution, your security and your liberty. Look, there were other tools available. We were accused of using some of these other tools. The judge came close to accusing us of those other tools just a few minutes ago. We were accused of having a drift net over Dearborn, Michigan, or Fremont, California, and sucking up the content of phone calls of American citizens, and then searching those phone calls for keyword searches, looking for words like bomb and things like that. That never happened. We never got to content. By the way, we never even collected the metadata. There were no metaphorical alligator clips on some metaphorical wires here. We actually got the billing records from large telecommunication carriers in the United States. So those who claim that, well, no, when something's of interest, you can click on that number and see the content, that just doesn't violate the laws of the United States. That would violate the laws of physics. There is nothing there that allows that to take place. So we gather this metadata, we put it in a large repository, and hey, truth in lending, Judge, it's big. All right? Practically speaking, it's a record of calls made within and between the United States and elsewhere over years, and billions, if not trillions, of records. But now what happens to them? Well, to use a phrase that's probably not popular around here, we put them in a lockbox. And we access this lockbox only under very strict circumstances. We have to have what's called a reasonable articulable suspicion. Judge, it's not quite probable cause. Reasonable articulable suspicion that we have a phone number associated with terrorism, a foreign phone number. So imagine, if you will, we roll up a safe house in Yemen. We grab some guys we haven't seen before. We grab a phone we've never seen before. But it's associated with these fellows who are associated with terrorism. We have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that that's a terrorist phone. So what do? We get to walk up to this ocean of metadata, and we get to kind of metaphorically now yell through the transom, "Hey, anybody in here talk to this phone?" And if we get a number in the Bronx, it kind of raises its hand and says, "Well, yeah, I got to talk to him every Thursday." NSA then gets to say, "Well, then who the hell do you talk to?" I am now done explaining to you the authorities of the National Security Agency when it comes to this program. Anything else that is done with that data has to go through law enforcement, not foreign intelligence processes. How many people get to yell through the transom, "Hey, anybody talk to this number?" The last time I counted at NSA was 22. How many times did NSA yell through the transom? In 2012, it was about 200 times. In 2013, it was 160 times. Now look, honest men can differ about this. I understand that. Honest folks may even object to the existence of the database. But before we pass judgment, let's look at this in its totality and how it has been conducted. Again, at the end of the discussion here, some of you may disagree with me, but I think we all should allow ourselves to think this ain't quite the British Army parking on Boston Common. Thank you.
Well, as the only non-libertarian on the stage, I'd like to address a couple of things and begin with whether it be general warrants or national security letters. The reality is most Americans are pragmatic, Judge. They want to be safe. They want to be secure. Is there a resolution beyond saying that the Fourth Amendment, the Constitution of the United States, forbids intervention? Because we know that as a nation, we've had surveillance. We have expected surveillance. If we separate utilities, say Google and Facebook, from what was once AT&T, I think most Americans would have been mightily upset to find out AT&T was not cooperating with the federal government and its respective relevant agencies.
You know, most people who defend the Constitution and defend the concept of privacy do not object to all spying. They object to all spying all the time on everyone. When the general and his folks have reasonable, articulable suspicion or a higher level probable cause, they can go to a judge and get a warrant about that individual. And that's what the Constitution requires. The good general took the same oath to uphold the same Constitution when he entered the military, and each time he got all of his well-deserved promotions to the rank of four-star general, as I took for my terms on the Superior Court of New Jersey. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It governs the government wherever it goes, whatever it does, no matter what its task is. If there's a problem with the Constitution, amend it. But while the Fourth Amendment is there, it says, if you want to search someone, you have to present evidence about that person.
And when you say go to court, I presume you're not talking about a FISA court.
When I was sitting on the bench, the general's probably familiar with this, judges sit 24/7. It's sometimes a ridiculous assignment and sometimes an unwanted assignment because you have to be awake 24/7. And my friend Judge Royce Lamberth, who sits in Washington, D.C., and occasionally 24/7, also a friend of General Hayden's, famously signed a search warrant on the back of his motorcycle at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I have signed search warrants in my gym shorts in my living room at 3 o'clock in the morning. So judges are always available to hear emergent applications when there is probable cause about the target. The problem with what General Hayden's folks have done is they've gone to a secret court and said, give us the authority to listen to or gather data from and about all of Verizon's customers. That's 110 million human beings, as to which there is zero evidence about inappropriate behavior on the part of any of them.
Your response, General?
Sure. First of all, the jury should disregard the remark about content because this is about metadata. And again, we can argue about metadata, but it's not about content. It's about fact of call. And again, I repeat, the controlling legal authority is Smith versus Maryland, 1979. There is not a reasonable expectation of privacy that you or I have about the bill that your telecommunications carrier has about you. Now, with regard to reasonable articulable suspicion or probable cause, the judge wants us to go to a judge. Keep in mind what I said in my narrative here, all right? This is not reasonable articulable suspicion about the number in the Bronx that I referred to. This is reasonable articulable suspicion that the phone we just stashed in Yemen is affiliated with terrorism. By the way, the macro collection of the metadata since 2006 has been authorized by a court, unless it does go to a FISA judge about the specific phone number in Yemen before they make the inquiry.
Satisfied?
I'm satisfied that the general believes what he said. I'm not satisfied that it's even remotely consistent with the Constitution.
Let me turn to another aspect. After Edward Snowden, the Edward Snowden affair broke.
You know, this is supposed to be a happy occasion. Now you mention Snowden.
It is a happy occasion, and it's going to get happier. The reality is this, that we learned from General Keith Alexander.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there real quick because I want to get back to the point that the judge is pointing out that, well, you say the Supreme Court ruled that metadata. That what he's saying is that is a wrongful ruling and is inconsistent with the Constitution, and the Supreme Court can't just go, well, your privacy doesn't extend to your private phone calls. That, and he says, well, we get the bills, but you collect the metadata. But we go and get the bills. Is that just easier to get the bill than to search through your metadata and decipher your metadata? Because remember, they would have to decipher. It's easier to just go to Verizon. But, you know, I'm sure they're working on that. And again, it goes back to what you do with it is not what everyone may do with it. And when that person they know is not willing to do what they want, they can replace them. Again, you know, it just goes against your personal rights. Definitely when it comes to government intrusion. But now they're on to Snowden, so here we go.
Who is running the NSA upon inquiry as to his revelations, when asked about the number of conspiracies and planned attacks that were thwarted, the number given by General Alexander initially was 57. And we'll go with that number rather than the adjustments later. 57. What I wonder is why in the world the oversight committees, intelligence oversight committees of the House and the Senate, why they didn't know that number themselves, and two, why that number has not been in some way incorporated into analysis of the strategy of what we're doing, its cost, and its arguably intrusions into American society.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it gets to the reasonableness argument in the front half of the Fourth Amendment. The judge is emphasizing the back half, that no warrant shall be issued except upon probable cause. But you realize, certainly any of you who came here by airplane realize, that not all searches are prompted or legitimated by a warrant. All right? That is the overall standard has to do with reasonableness. And Lou, you're right. The judgment on reasonableness has to include the factor whether or not it's worth doing. Do you get anything out of the other end? I mean, I understand the offense. If you got your phone bills up at Fort Meade or somewhere and no good comes from it, that you can't stand that argument. That doesn't go anywhere. Keith, when he said 54, was referring to significant events where we were able to intervene for not just the 215 program, but the 702 program. It was the totality of things that Snowden revealed with regard to American privacy. This is going to affect
telephonic and digital.
Digital, exactly right. This is going to offend the judge even more. Remember I said we go to a court to get a warrant since 2006. I didn't go to a court to get a warrant for 4 years at NSA. We were doing the ancestor of this program under raw executive authority, which, by the way, the Fights Appellate Court has upheld, saying that we take as a given that the executive has inherent constitutional authority to conduct electronic surveillance without a warrant for foreign intelligence purposes. So we're still basing this on a body of law. We have learned a lot from this program. I went and looked at some notes of the things we were able to show when I was doing it through my time at the agency, which was 2005. About 18 months ago, the president ordered the closure of about 36 American consulates and embassies throughout the Middle East. And as a matter of record, the president then says to Jim Clapper, we got a North American nexus to this threat? I mean, is this only about the Middle East? And Jim, because of this program, because we were tracking the program through phone numbers, was able to jam those phone numbers up against the metadata program, came up empty, and said no evidence that there's a North American nexus here, which is, one, very useful for security, but you realize it's also very useful for liberty. Because if the president was genuinely concerned that it had a North American nexus, what were his other options to give him confidence that he could keep you safe?
A couple of comments. You only talked about the first half of General Alexander's testimony, in which he testified under oath in response to the either House or Senate Intelligence Committee, I don't remember which, that it was 54 or 57 plots that were stopped as a result of NSA spying. The next day, General Alexander wrote to amend his testimony to say it wasn't 54, it was 3. And when asked to identify the 3, he declined to identify them. I could list a half a dozen plots that have gotten through. The shoe bomber, the Boston Marathon bombers, the Copenhagen bombers, the revolution in Yemen, the revolution in Ukraine. Well, you guys knew about that because you fomented it. The NSA's problem is it has too much information. It's listening to innocent people rather than focusing on those as to whom there is evidence of wrongdoing. I don't care, and the Constitution doesn't care who you listen to in a foreign country. I care who you listen to in the United States, and the Constitution says the prerequisite is probable cause.
We're talking about the 215 program, which has to do with metadata and phone bills. That is the high watermark of NSA with regard to domestic communications in the United States. Once again, the judge has used the verb listen. I challenge any of you to take your phone bill when you go back at home and put it up to your ear and listen. See what you can learn.
And I think for the record, we should also point out that there are other agencies that have some responsibility, for example, in the Boston Marathon bombing, and amongst them the FBI, which had direct information from the Russians as to their concerns about those two brothers and some of their associates. It's always, I don't know if it's comforting to say that there are more agencies who are not adequate to a given task, but anyway, there it is. I'd also like to get some idea of privacy as it exists and the national security interests as it exists in a nexus between the private sector and the public. And that is, we have two plaintiffs right now suing the federal government, Twitter and Google, insisting that they have a higher standing and responsibility for privacy than even the government itself, is the effect of that suit, in my judgment. But where we have private companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they are cooperating, it seems, to greater degrees with the government, for example, of China than they are with the government of the United States. It is a peculiar moment in our history. Whereas we would once have expected these companies to be very, very cooperative with our agencies, they are in fact resisting. And doing so to what end, I don't think it's entirely clear to most of us. And I'd like to get your idea as to this conflict between private interest and public.
I don't like any more than anybody else if Google or Verizon or AT&T shares my email with you, with the government of China or the government of the United States. If I'm a Google or AT&T customer, they have a duty under our contractual relationship to respect my privacy. However, the Fourth Amendment only governs the government. It does not govern private entities.
Right.
And if Google wants to disseminate my emails to Lou Dobbs or General Hayden, they can do so, and it's my obligation then to find another carrier. The problem is that the federal government of the United States, through General Hayden's former colleagues, have pretty much said to Google, open everything up for us. Let us in there. We don't want to go to a judge. We don't want to have to come to you. We want to be there, present in your facilities, so that when we need to read a phone call or learn the metadata, we're right there and we can get it. And they all caved.
Your response?
Wait for the applause.
Okay. Come on, you can do better than that.
Again, if NSA were doing the things the judge just outlined, we would not be having a debate. All right? He kind of echoed what's called the 702 program, which allows the National Security Agency to approach ISPs, internet service providers, email providers, with specific foreign email accounts that have been warranted by a judge in a general way, admittedly, foreign email accounts that the agency can then access for foreign intelligence purposes. You mentioned the Boston Marathon 2 or 3 times. Let me come back to that as kind of a little morality play for what we're talking about here. The judge mentioned it as a failure.
Can it be a one-act play?
I can be very quick. The judge mentioned it as a failure, right? And the NSA and other agencies have been criticized. These 2 kids, the Tsarnaevis, they were out there surfing the web for jihadist websites. In God's name, what are you people doing? How didn't you know this? Well, the reason we didn't know this is that we do not look at the web activity of American citizens or legal permanent residents in the United States. This isn't this open-ended activity that's been suggested up here. This is actually very narrow. And the National Security Agency and other elements of the security structure actually have chosen not to do things for your privacy that unarguably would actually make you a bit safer.
May I ask the general a question?
No. Yes.
Does the head of the NSA have the constitutional and legal authority to move the line between privacy and surveillance?
There's a clue how they would like you to answer.
A plebiscite going on here.
It's a trick question because I know how he answered it last month at a law school.
At Washington and Lee.
Yes.
All right. You want the rest of the story?
Yes.
All right. This may be a two-act play. All right. But I'll give you the executive summary. I'll be efficient. What I did the afternoon of 9/11 had to do with something called minimization. You know, the accusations fit on a bumper sticker. The reality takes a little longer, and I'm sorry. But minimization is what NSA does when it inadvertently, incidentally collects information about you. I mean, the NSA could be targeting a foreigner. That foreigner talks to you. NSA is still targeting the foreigner. In the routine conduct of its business, it gathers information to, from, or about what we call protected persons, which is actually a bigger group than U.S. citizens. Right? When NSA does that, NSA is required to suppress the U.S. identity. So, in other words, foreign terrorist Abu Ahmed bin Bad Guy was talking to a known U.S. person. We won't say the judge, just a known U.S. person. And we minimize the U.S. identity to protect your privacy, unless, of course, the identity of the U.S. person is absolutely essential to the intelligence value of the intercept in the first place. And so I've got a bad guy talking to that phone number in the Bronx and says, brother, the attack tomorrow is at noon. I think the U.S. person identity is pretty important to the intelligence value of that report. So that on the afternoon of September 11th, 2001, with 3,000 of my countrymen dead and smoking holes in 2 cities and in countryside in my native western Pennsylvania, I told the NSA analysts when they were making the judgment based upon the reasonableness standard of the Fourth Amendment, when they were making the judgment as to whether or not the U.S. identity for calls from Afghanistan, whether or not the U.S. identity was essential to understanding the intelligence value, they should use a different standard than they used at 8 o'clock that morning. That's the line I moved, Judge.
You asked.
I didn't hear you use the word Constitution.
So then,
that document to which you swore an oath of fidelity.
So then I told George Tenet what I was doing, and George told the president and vice president, and then I called up the chair and ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees and told them what I was doing. I offered to come down to explain it to them in detail. The Senate said, fine, you're cool. The House said, come on down, and I did, and explained it in detail to our oversight bodies. By the way, talking about oversight and secret law and so on, you know, the strongest defenders of what NSA has been doing have been the chair and ranking of the 2 oversight committees, have been the chair and ranking of the people most knowledgeable, most responsible for what they do. And we talk about Ron Wyden, who has certainly opposition to all of these programs. The reason Senator Wyden has been so public is that, and again, you may agree with him and not me, but in the committee, which knew fully of these programs, he consistently lost the vote 13-2.
If I may, I'd like to go to, in the short time we have available here, I'd like to go to what I think is implicit in this discussion, and that is a lack of trust in our government on the part of the American people. I would like to go further and say to you, I believe in a constitutional republic. I think it is also important that we understand that trust, you mentioned the heads and ranking members of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, who, in my view, and I would ask you both to give us your assessment, they have not provided vigorous and broad intelligence oversight. Congress has one of the lowest approval ratings in history right now. The President of the United States, the same may be said of him The openness and transparency has certainly not devolved from this presidency. We know that there are great and good public servants like General Hayden, but we need far more in the way of assurances that that Constitution is being observed, that we share national values and the national interest. And I truly believe the American people right now have profound, persistent doubts about that reality.
Can I comment?
Sure.
Yeah. Lou's absolutely right. And one of the challenges that people like me have had is that this discussion is taking place in a perfect storm of both governmental and executive overreach. Right? And so how well or often I might argue the appropriateness of this, I know it's happening in a broader context of the IRS, and I've got a pen and a phone, and we can't wait, and the president deciding whether or not the Senate was or was not in session for recess appointments. It poisons this entire discussion. And that's why I go out of my way to say, but let's talk about the specifics on this one so that we can make that judgment.
But what also poisons all of this is the lack of accountability and lack of transparency because of passion for secrecy with which the government has argued. You see, what the general did not tell you is when he goes to these committee members and reveals what they're doing, and the committee members say yes, the committee members are sworn to secrecy and cannot tell their fellow members of the House and cannot tell their fellow members of the Senate and cannot tell the voters who sent them there. So the government has intentionally created a secret, deep government, if you will, and sworn everybody in there to secrecy, including the judges who've been complicit in this. The essence of democracy and freedom is that the government works for us. We don't work for it. Sure. And so we have to know what it is doing.
So the judge brings up an incredibly important point, and he and I probably agree that my old community needs to be more transparent. All right? But let's be real about this. Okay? You don't conduct espionage by plebiscite. Espionage is an activity that succeeds only because of secrecy. Now, the grand compromise, and by the way, we're still the only Western democracy that does what I'm going to describe for you now. The grand compromise of the mid to late 1970s is that espionage, which previously was the province only of the executive, will now have oversight from the other branches of government. Out of the 70s come the oversight committees, by the way, which don't exist in other democracies. We have the House and the Senate oversight committees. I am legally and morally responsible to keep them fully and currently informed of what it is we're doing. And then, and no one else does this, we brought the court in. Now, I understand it's the FISA court. And the judge says the FISA court is weird because it's secret. I'm telling you it's weird because it exists. No other Western democracy goes to a court to conduct espionage. And so when we're looking at this from NSA, with the balance between secrecy needed for success and transparency needed for approval, we're saying this was authorized by the president, legislated by Congress, overseen by the court. I'm sorry, folks, that is the Madisonian trifecta.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say thank you, first of all, and what a pleasure and honor it is to be with Judge Napolitano.
Okay. So, what you see is, well, you know, if we legislate it, we can legislate your rights away. What they fail to understand is that when all the government bodies go ahead and they work together, but they don't systematically, go to each other and, this is what we need to do. They come from clubs. They come from, this is what I'm going to do. You're going to back me up type club. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. And when they come from these clubs, it's pretty easy to manipulate the government. So what they fail to say is, well, did they amend the Constitution? Because if they legislate your rights away, but that doesn't go along with the Constitution, your Bill of Rights, then it's contrary. You know, it says that the government can legislate, but these are your rights. And of course, the founding documents are not perfect. They're not what a libertarian would call a good thing. They're definitely a step in the right direction from where we're at right now, but they've also led to where we're at right now, because really it breaks down to what are the people willing to give up. And people have just been too comfortable. And the government decides that you guys are too comfortable too. So it's going to be a stick in the spoke. And with everything coming down, it seems that, you know, America, even though they'll tell you, oh, stocks are doing better or this is doing better, it's all a facade and a bubble. And at the same time, they're still taking your rights. You're probably not moving up. You might be doing okay. Not to say that you're hurting, but you're not seeing the ability to progress the way maybe 15 years ago you seen the possibility of. Right now we're kind of in a stalemate, and the more power grab that they seem to take, the worse it seems to be getting. And that's usually a sign of a government in its death throes. And I hate to use that term, but that's the one that comes to mind, because even though it's in its death throes, what a government or empire's death throes are can take a long period of time. But it's a sign of the end of, you know, the prosperous period. And I always hope that this is wrong. I hope I'm dead wrong about this. But, you know, it's also one of those things that you see the signs and it's like, okay, you know, this is a sign. Let's hope that it's just a coincidence. And then you see another sign and you're like, God, come on. It's really up to the American people. And I'm someone that, you know, I'm definitely a free market person. I think you should be able to deal with whoever you want. If you want to deal with people over in China dealing goods, you know, buying products off them, I'd definitely be someone that would want to know that the right safety precautions are taken. But you have that right, and that's part of the free market. But one thing I am also a proponent of is buying local and try to support your local economy and, you know, your state, the United States. Basically start local, then what you can't get local, expand. And just, you know, do what you can. And I understand prices when it comes to local stuff is high. But that also should tell you that you should be asking for more money. There's another kind of problem with that in some circumstances. When you get to a smaller local owned company, their wages might not be that high, but you also might not be, doing a high paid job there. So, it's a trade off. But compared to a large corporation, maybe, your local clothing resale store, boutique or whatever might, pay minimum wage, while the corporate nationwide or international store, boutique right down the street might be paying $2 more than minimum wage an hour. Well, I would probably support the local one. And for some people, that's hard to comprehend. Why would you take less money? Well, it's not about taking less money. What can you do to help that company out to start bringing in more money? Go work for them. Give them ideas. And you might run into a company that just isn't willing. I'm doing it my way, no ideas. Even if they're not bringing in that good of a profit, they don't care. It's more about them just working for themselves rather than being a successful business. And that's fine. That's their right. And you have a right to go find another job. But what I found is a lot of the local companies, you're more personal with the owners. And that also creates a relationship where, you know what they expect. You also know how to go beyond what they expect in a way that they would allow. And that's by, suggesting things, coming up with creative ideas to make things more efficient. And when that local company prospers and starts bringing more revenue, and they see that you've been a vital tool in their progression, you'll get paid eventually. And what that also does is it helps your local economy. But, we should also remember, free market, you do have to deal with the global market. And I think when you spread wealth of people's labor and what they contribute, we can fix that problem. But we have a lot of things that are starting to happen here that's already happened in a lot of countries around the world. And I'm going to get into net neutrality here in a minute. Trying to find something here. Okay. A second here. Had to reload it. Okay. When it comes to the free market, there's a lot of ways that we can deal international to help out other people. And that's, don't buy from the international factories, buy from the local makers. Find companies. There's importers and U.S. companies that import handmade by local villagers that come together to start making things to buy from, that you can buy from them. And one thing that's even starting to go to what you would think would be communities that don't have a lot of technology. You'd be surprised some of these countries actually do have quite a bit of technology. And Bitcoin, I've seen stories coming out around the globe that talking about Bitcoin. I'm like, wow, I didn't think they would have. Well, whoa, they have Bitcoin too, and it's amazed me. And one thing here, We Are Change put out one what Bitcoin can really do, and I found this interesting about Bitcoin, so I want to go ahead and play this. And this one, Luke talks with Sam Patterson. He's launching a decentralized Bitcoin marketplace with Tor support, and he gets into what he wants to create, and this is a pretty revolutionary idea when it comes to Bitcoin, having a decentralized marketplace. And this really goes out against a lot of these marketplaces that may be operating a little shady. We've seen other marketplaces go down because of it. And it's helped balance the Bitcoin back out. But, what harm did it possibly do? I think in the long run, very little, but in the short term, it definitely kind of hit Bitcoin a little bit. But let's go ahead and play this.
I think Bitcoin is basically just opening up the ability for people to control their own money in a way that the internet opened up the ability for people to communicate with each other.
This is Grodowski of WeAreChange.org. I'm here with Sam Patterson of Open Bazaar. But first of all, Sam, what is Open Bazaar?
Open Bazaar is a decentralized network for trade that uses Bitcoin. So current e-commerce model is basically you have a company that owns a server, you have both people talk to that server. The company can take a cut of that trade or they can censor that trade. What we're doing with Open Bazaar is creating a system where people directly talk to each other and buy and sell using Bitcoin.
Are you guys worried with the implications of government regulations, government crackdowns? It seems like a lot of people in the Bitcoin community are facing a lot of these kind of laws that are just being made up out of nowhere, whether it's the Silk Road or whether it's Charlie Shrem. What precautions are you guys taking to make sure you guys are safeguarded?
It's a good question. So to speak about the Silk Road specifically, right? The Silk Road was a centralized marketplace that was created by an individual and a small group of people for profit and with the explicit goal of selling, illicit, maybe not immoral, but illicit items on it. Whereas Open Bazaar is fundamentally different than that. It is an open source, decentralized, not controlled by any organization. It's not being run for profit, and it's not being, we're not picking the classification of goods that are going to be used, right? We're agnostic to that. Anyone can buy and sell anything on the platform that they want. So we think that basically means that because we aren't benefiting from it, that we're not going to face the same legal problems that others have.
And a lot of people kind of make this argument, and a lot of people are afraid of Bitcoins because they say it could be potentially used for all these horrible things. But the same could be said for cash, and a lot of people don't even make that distinction. Is there any other kind of arguments that you want to break down when it comes to Bitcoin and some of the preconceived notions that people kind of in the mainstream have about this kind of new currency?
Well, because it's new, I think people sometimes are a little bit afraid of it. They don't really, they're just not that knowledgeable about what it is or how it works. What I like to do is sort of back up and actually say, what about the founders of the internet itself? Right? What they did is basically just said, here is a communication protocol to allow electronic devices to talk to each other. That's it. That is what it does. The founders of the internet aren't going to weigh in about how it should or should not be used. All they do is create a neutral technology and put it out to the public. And the public has mostly used it for good things and mostly benefited from it in huge ways. But of course, some people use the internet for bad things, right? That is not the responsibility of the people who created those protocols to begin with. I view Bitcoin the same way, and I view OpenBazaar the same way. These are protocols to allow people to exchange money or exchange goods, and it's up to people to obey their own conscience and to make their own decisions.
Now, a lot of people that I also talk to are afraid of the security flaws or are afraid of the kind of digitizing of money. But you made a great point during your talk about how money in general is being digitized, and it's going to go that way in the future. And it's either going to be decentralized, controlled by individuals, or controlled by the big banksters who are just putting zeros into a computer and clicking next, and that's our monetary system. So with everything moving as fast as it is with technology, where do you see the future of Bitcoin, and where do you see the potential of Bitcoin actually being something that could help people?
So I actually just gave an hour talk on that very subject, on how Bitcoin can improve well-being. There's a lot of ways that it could do it. I think the simplest way to sum it up is to say it's giving people more control over their own money. It's really as simple as that. You just don't have to rely on third parties. Those third parties often have an incentive, they take a cut because they're providing a service. They take a portion of your money, right? So that automatically makes you better off if you don't have to pay them. You have more money. But they are also beholden to other gatekeepers in society, most notably the government, who monitors your trade and makes sure that you only trade the things that are acceptable to them. So I think Bitcoin is basically just opening up the ability for people to control their own money in a way that the internet opened up the ability for people to communicate with each other. And how exactly is that going to improve people's well-being in society? How is it going to change, the structure of society itself, or at least our financial structure? Yeah. I don't know exactly, but I definitely err on the side of giving more individuals more control over their own money.
Some of the things you mentioned that I really found exciting is the fact that you could pay 3 cents to read an article or watch a video instead of having major credit card processing fees. But with Bitcoin, there are no processing fees, and you could easily pay that 3 cents. Or the fact that you could also revolutionize the micro-lending kind of aspect of the world. Are there any particular projects or potentials with Bitcoin that excite you personally?
Well, one quick thing I mentioned, and it's still in beta and it's very early on, but there's actually one effort called Watch My Bit, which basically means you can upload your own video content, and then you can charge your rate for how much people have to pay in order to see it. And most of the videos on there are like 5 cents or something. So all you do is you pay Bitcoin to this address, and then you're able to watch this video. So the type of system where you can combine micropayments along with original content is a pretty powerful kind of thing that no one's really done before. So it can be done with music as well. So imagine original, people making their own original music that people pay to listen to, for a few cents or something like that. It's a different way of doing business than what we were used to in the past. And you can't do it without something like Bitcoin. It's not possible.
Yes, and there's no big banks, there's no credit card companies, there's no management or music companies taking the dollar, taking their cut out of it, which is really fascinating.
Well, one more thing I'd add is we're viewing the types of things you can do with Bitcoin from the mindset of what you can or cannot already do and saying, wouldn't that be neat? But the real exciting part about Bitcoin and technologies like Bitcoin is they're open source and they're free to join. They're free to use. And so really what's going to happen is nothing cool that we predict is really what the value is going to be. It's going to be some new idea that just pops up out of nowhere. And all of a sudden it's like, well, of course, this is how the system works, because no one thought about it. It's going to emerge out of the marketplace, and that's what I'm really waiting to see.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Just bringing through, even though there's some kind of regulations, there's some kind of new laws. And just one thing, if I could just bring up one thing that really intrigues me, there's cases of HSBC funding drug cartels and money laundering for mafiosos and terrorist organizations, and they get a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the person who was running the Silk Road, allegedly, is now charged on all counts and is facing 25 years to life. Is there anything that you wish to add or wish to say on the topic of the future of maybe government and Bitcoin?
It's a good question. What I'll say is just specifically about the Silk Road stuff is people should be able to peacefully engage in trade with each other, as long as they're not hurting anyone. To the extent that people on the Silk Road were hurting or trying to hurt other people, that's bad. I don't condone that at all. But I think if we take a long view of history, 50 years from now, it's going to seem bizarre to us that someone trying to allow other people to buy and sell plants or other drugs online should go to prison, for his life. So. In the long-term view of things, I think the types of activity that is being labeled as harmful, or the things that Bitcoin can do that are labeled as harmful, are not really going to look that harmful in the future.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's a double standard with the people who are with the establishment, with the banks, who get away with it with fines, which is utterly ridiculous. But fascinating information. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more information about you and the projects that you're working on?
So my website's samuelrpatterson.com, and has contact information, some of the projects I work on. And for Open Bazaar, you can go to openbazaar.org, or you can go to our Open Bazaar subreddit.
We are change.org.
Rich. Ross has nothing. He's completely dependent.
WeAreChange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Check them out. When we look at Bitcoin, there's people that hate it, there's people that love it, and there's people that are on the fence. It really, there's really a diverse group when it comes to Bitcoin and where people are at with it. But it is new technology, and I think there are a lot of good things about it. I think there are uncertainties. It's not the perfect way to remain anonymous, but it does anonymize to a point. But in reality, it's not going to completely hide anything. It's going to be able to at least say that you've had this connection, transferred this amount of Bitcoin to this person, and if they can find your Bitcoin address, they can track what you do. If you donated Bitcoin to me, well, my Bitcoin wallet address is posted. Therefore, if you send me Bitcoin, they're going to know that I received the Bitcoin because I have a public address. And that's where people get in trouble. Another way people get in trouble is, well, I got an anonymous Bitcoin address that I don't tell anybody about, and I'm going to transfer from my one to the other. Well, they already know you had it. Then it went to the other one. Whether they know who that other one is, if they see, well, the only transactions going out from your non-anonymous account, it only goes out to this other account, and that account then diversifies it by spending it everywhere. Well, they're going to probably realize that maybe that anonymous account might just be your hidden account. And supposedly, allegedly, that is part of how they were tracking Ross Albright, and plenty of other things allegedly. But there are a lot of libertarians out there that, in Ross Albright's circumstance, say that even though drugs are considered legal, what Ross Albright did was create a safer place for people to conduct business that doesn't harm a person per se, other than the person that's engaging voluntarily in it. But it's not been blessed by government approval. And, you know, we know the drug war doesn't work. We know that making a substance illegal doesn't work. We tried prohibition with alcohol. We tried prohibition with all these other drugs, and it doesn't help. It does give pretty easy job for cops, you know, busting the people smoking the joint. By the way, props to the mayor of D.C., since D.C. is not a state, it's a city-state that doesn't have any true representation. A basically honorary Congress person, but no actual representation in Congress. They're not considered part of any state, so they can't work on state nullification. This is one major thing with DC. They don't get to be a part of any state nullification unless the states kind of take back their split DC in half and take back DC. Doubt that'll happen. But again, no state nullification. But the city decided to vote, DC did, on marijuana. And the mayor is standing by what the people voted for. Said, listen, they voted, and I'm going to stand by it. So, props to the mayor there for that. I'm sure that was kind of a push in a political way, but not so much. I do want to get on to this net neutrality. And Mark Cuban has been from Shark Tank. He's been, and he owns Dallas Mavericks. But he's been very vocal about this net neutrality before and after. This out of Breitbart.com. Dallas Mavericks owner and investor Mark Cuban predicted that proposed FCC internet regulations will end up impacting TV, and your TV as you know it is over on Thursday, Squawk Alley on CNBC. Cuban began by predicting the courts will rule the internet for the next however many years. Then he explained, let's just take it all the way through its logical conclusion. All bits are bits. All bits are equal. If all bits are equal, then let's look at what a stream bit is. An example. So when Henry and I do an interview and it's streamed live on the internet, there's a camera. It goes through an encoder. It sends it out via server or some manner to the internet. You clicked on Business Insider and you watch the stream, right? Now let's look at CNBC on Comcast. There's a camera right in front of you. They go through a switcher. They go through an encoder. It's put through a server. It goes to Comcast and it's streamed in a managed service environment to television. it's the exact same thing, and if it's the exact same thing technologically, and all bits are equal, then why shouldn't CNBC and all TV networks that are delivered on cable and telco and fiber like Verizon, why shouldn't they be part of the open internet as well? And if they are, and all bits are equal now, let's take it another step further. It's a purview of the FCC now, the FCC, right? So the FCC now has to apply their same standards to content, don't they? That they do to television content, because that's where it is, and that's where it's going to be certain citizens who think, well, now since all content is delivered over the internet, because all bits are bits, and it's fair and open and equal internet decency standards. And remember, the FCC is the same agency that fought Nipplegate for 8 years over a wardrobe malfunction. And I'm going to play this clip here.
I don't think anybody's thinking it all the way through. I mean, look, we're all for a fair and open internet, right? But let's just take it all the way through its logical conclusion. All bits are bits. All bits are equal. If all bits are equal, then let's look at what a stream bit is as an example. So when Henry and I do an interview and it's streamed live on the internet, there's a camera, it goes through an encoder, it sends it out via server or some manner to the internet, you click on Business Insider, and you watch the stream, right? Now let's look at CNBC on Comcast. There's cameras right in front of you, they go through a switcher, they go through an encoder, it's put through a server, it goes to Comcast, and it streams in a managed service environment to television. It's the exact same thing. And if it's the exact same thing technologically and all bits are equal, then why shouldn't CNBC and all TV networks be delivered that are delivered on cable and telcos and fiber like Verizon? Why shouldn't they be part of the open internet as well? And if they are and all bits are equal, now let's take it one step further. It's the purview of the FCC now, the FCC, right? So the FCC now has to apply their same standards to content, don't they, that they do to television content, because that's where it is. And there's going to be certain citizens who think, well, now since all content is delivered over the internet, because all bits are bits and it's a fair and open and equal internet, decency standards. And remember, the FCC is the same agency that fought Nipplegate for 8 years over a wardrobe malfunction.
Yeah, and net neutrality, Mark, is
we're not done yet. There's more.
I think it is the only thing that has surpassed Nipplegate in garnering as many public comments. Obviously, a lot of people are watching this. Many share your logic, but the FCC in 2010 tried to regulate the internet, and the court system struck it down.
Exactly.
That's expected to happen this time, not necessarily the court outcome, but that it will go to court.
Yep.
And the courts back then found that the FCC didn't have the enforcement authority to regulate the internet. What is different now? Is it just the fact that the White House has gotten involved as well?
No, the Verizon decision came in and it opened back up. But the White House obviously has an impact, and let's go through that logic. So Chairman Wheeler had one position that is different than now. Now, then the Verizon decision comes along. Then we get the President of the United States giving his position. Then Chairman Wheeler changes his. Now we have the vote that we're having. Does anybody really think that it's going to be any different for a future chairman, with future presidents, with a future makeup of the FCC? There's going to be, I don't even know, a whack-a-mole environment going forward on our internet.
So,
and
Mark,
it's just crazy.
Mark, John Ford here. So what happens now is my question. Clearly, people who agree with you lost the marketing round on this one. Net neutrality and Title II.
You hit the nail on the head right there. They lost the marketing, right?
Yeah,
they didn't lose the facts. They lost the marketing.
Exactly. It came to mean Title II and net neutrality together, glommed together as if they're the same thing, came to mean the free and open internet. So round 2 or round 3 or whatever round is next, what is the argument from your point of view that's going to win the masses over to thinking, well, maybe round 1 didn't go to the right?
I'll give it to you very simply. Your TV, as you know it, is over.
All All right. You want to expand on that, Mark?
I just did before, right? So let's just say there's 250 channels on Comcast, and they all have 4 megabits, right? That's what they're encoding at right now. 4 megabits times 250. If it's not part of a paid prioritization or managed service, and it's just now part of the open internet, and you have to go click on a website, you have to click on CNBC to get the live stream. Now, what you do is you just put 1 gigabit into the open internet. That solves your bandwidth problem, right? But it takes away your TV. Now you have to go, just like we went through the digital transition with the FCC and spent billions of dollars on new set-top boxes for everybody to get digital over the air. Now you need a new set-top box if you want your TV to resemble anything at all like what it used to. But basically your TV is gone. But wait, there's more. Okay, shopping channels like QVC, over because they're paid prioritization. They pay to be on Comcast and others, right? Like they pay. Gone. They're paid prioritization. Over. You just have to go to QVC if you want to go to QVC, and they're like any other website. So if you want your TV like you've always had your TV, forget about it. Now, look, the reality is they'll sue. People will sue to try to prevent that from happening. Politicians will all of a sudden realize what's going on. The FCC will say, well, no, this is a managed service, and we always excluded managed services. But then, because that's a managed service, everybody and their brother is going to try to make their delivery of a stream a managed service as well. And that's going to fall into paid prioritization, and there'll be a big kerfuffle, and everybody will fight it out, and things will stop. And that's the problem with net neutrality. If you love the Internet the way you know it today, this is what you're going to have for a long time. If you're like me and you think the best is yet to come, then you don't want the FCC involved because of all the uncertainty.
Do you have hope that as it works its way through the legal circles you just mentioned, that it will wind the way you think it should be?
No, absolutely not.
That this vote is just a big obstacle?
No, it gets worse. There is no better when it goes to lawsuits. I mean, look, Henry and I had to deal with the FCC where they basically invented new laws, or created new scenarios that they could take through the courts to try to invent new laws. This is no different, right? Look at the FCC of the past. There was a previous commissioner. I was reading something that Chairman Wheeler wrote when he first came to office, and one of the commissioners 20, 25 years ago was smart. They allocated spectrum for wireless. But his position was, we'll do it, but wireless is a frivolous application. And because he felt it was frivolous, it got delayed for 15 years. We would have been way further ahead had it not been delayed, the way I read what he wrote. So there's so much uncertainty that's introduced because, A, you've got the courts. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows who's going to sue? It could well be that, John Ford is suing because people want pure a la carte and they don't like his segment and they don't want to pay for his segment on CNBC when they go to the website.
We know that's not going to happen.
Of course not. But you see the absurdity. You see the absurdity of when everything is sent to the courts. And then we're going to have a new commissioner, a new chairman in 2 years probably?
Yep. How about absent whether you think the vote should be yes or no? These concerns that House Oversight has over the process, about Wheeler not testifying, about coordination with the White House. Do you care?
Right? Yeah, lots of transparency. That's the FCC. That's the Department of Internet that we're going to get. No transparency.
And when you have the FCC, are they going to be able to censor the content? Well, they're not elected officials, so
Dropbox for Business has completely permeated.
Stupid commercial. It's one of those things that this, even if it's not immediately used against people, they've just given all the tools that are needed. Everything they need to do what they want is there. Now they just have to justify each action. And I think it'll just be a slow progression into it. And there'll be lawsuits. Just like Obamacare. You don't see anything happening to Obamacare. Oh, the Republicans are in office. We're safe. No. Um, they're not going to try to get rid of Obamacare. You should know by now, once they pass something, it's there. They might modify it. A lot of times, not even through their own legal process of doing it. They just do it however they feel like it. It's one of those things that it's going to progress, I believe. Let's hope that it progresses and doesn't just kapowie and you wake up and all alternative news sites are down. This was taken because it was a false news site not sanctioned by the government. This was not a real news site, or this wasn't a real journalist site. This wasn't a real broadcast site. That would be the most extreme case, and I doubt we would ever see that. But I definitely do know that how government acts. They just take something, write it that gives them a broad description, and they progressively build upon that through their own manipulation of regulation, not something that's passed by Congress. They'll have their little secret committee, kind of like the NSA secret committee, that will meet with the regulatory things. They'll do a public, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Behind closed doors, they go, this is why we're doing this, and you need to keep your mouth shut. It's one of those things that it's just going to progress. I got one here out of Reason.com. 3 charts that show the FCC is full of malarkey on net neutrality in Title II. As Peter Sutterman has noted, the federal FCC has voted in favor of reclassifying the internet from an information service to being a telecommunications service, and thus subject to same sort of Title II regulations that have governed voice telephony for decades. There will now be a long process of what exactly any of this means, followed by inevitable court battles. The FCC is 0 for 2 in recent attempts to expand its authority over the internet, and is hoping this third time will be the charm, and eventually possibly some actual implementation of what FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler insists will be light touch regulation, even though Title II rules give the FCC massive power to involve itself in every aspect of how internet service provider ISPs go about their business. Wheeler has promised the agency will, in fact, hardly use any of the powers granted to the FCC. Then why grant it to the FCC? Why would you approve that? Why would you write it in there? Today's vote is a major victory for proponents of net neutrality, a somewhat amorphous set of attitudes and policies which generally hold that ISPs should not be allowed to block legal sites, prioritize some traffic over other traffic, or create fast and slow lanes for the delivery of certain content and services. Clemson University economist, longtime Reason contributor, and former chief economist at the FCC, Thomas W. Hazite, defines net neutrality somewhat arcly as a set of rules regulating the business model of your local ISP. The typical nightmare scenario that gets thrown out goes something like this. Comcast, a giant ISP that controls NBC Universal, will push its own content on users by simply blocking sites that offer competing content. Or maybe it will delegate the video streams of Netflix and Amazon so no one will want to watch them. Or perhaps Comcast will just charge Netflix a lot of money to make sure its streams flow smoothly over that last mile that the ISPs controls. Or perhaps Comcast will implement tighter and tighter data caps on the amount of usage a given subscriber can use per month, but exempt its own content from any such limitations. It's worth noting, indeed, it's worth stressing that essentially none of these scenarios have come to pass over the past 20 years, despite the lack of net neutrality legislation. There have been occasional cases of this or that issue, but they were generally either the result of human error, technological breakdowns, or short-lived policies that customer complaints put an end to. The closest to anything like the nightmare scenarios above involved accusations by Netflix that Comcast and other ISPs were deliberately throttling its streams. Comcast said it was doing no such thing, a perspective supported by researchers at MIT and elsewhere who found that despite huge increases in demand and traffic, Netflix attempted to push its streams via congested parts of the internet. Netflix eventually agreed to pay Comcast higher fees for what is known as a peering arrangement that is not technically a net neutrality issue. What the situation actually underscores is that all the gee whiz magic of the internet, it depends ultimately on physical hardware and the resources that somebody somewhere has to build, expand, and pay for. Those charges to constantly upgrade and expand capacity will ultimately be borne by content providers such as Netflix, ISPs such as Comcast, and consumers such as you and me. Commenting on the Netflix Comcast pissing match at a recent tech conference, Mark Cuban, who made his first big pile with early streaming service Broadcast.com, remarked it's a battle between two fairly large companies. It says they worked it out just like happens in business every day. Cuban, it should be noted, as an archenemy of net neutrality and Title II, saying the same conference that the FCC and the government will F everything up, and having them oversee the internet scares the shit out of me. However you feel about net neutrality, generally the application of Title II regulate or regs to the internet, it's fair to say that much of the pretext for FCC action is suspect. That is, proponents typically claim that ISPs have monopolies over their local markets, that they offer shoddy and degraded connections, and that the United States is way behind other more civilized countries whose governments more heavily regulate the internet. With that in mind, there are some charts about the current state of the internet in the United States and elsewhere, some of which come from the FCC's own analysis. The above comes from FCC summary. This is at reason.com again, but it's talking about the chart above. The above comes from FCC's summary of the Internet Access Service status as of December 31st, 2012, the most recent document in the series that I found online. Over the 4-year period covered the number, variety, and speed of Internet connections increased significantly That's not something you would expect in monopoly conditions actually existed. Given the increasing centrality of the internet, you might see more people signing up for service, but a true monopoly would have no interest in or need to improve speed or variety of service. But it turns out, at least according to the FCC, the very agency that now says it needs to regulate the internet like a public utility in order to ensure a free and open internet, that the idea of monopoly ISPs is false. According to the FCC chart, 80% of households in America have at least two fixed and or mobile providers that offer at least 10 megabytes per second downstream speeds, which until recently was far above the agency concerned high-speed broadband. In 2010, the FCC defined a service that offered a 4 megabyte per second downstream and 1 megabyte per second upstream. Just a few weeks ago, it arbitrarily upped its definition to be 25 megabytes per second downstream and 3 megabytes per second upstream. Net old timers will remember the old days of 56K modems, and at the end of 2012, says the FCC, fully 96% of households had two or more providers offering 6 megabyte per second downstream and 1.5 megabyte per second upstream service. That might not give you all the bandwidth you want at any given moment, but it also presents a picture different than the monopoly situation that many net neutrality proponents rail against. If you're curious about options in your area, check out National Broadband Map. As important, think about how the delivery of the internet has evolved, first from a university-based system to early commercial providers using phone lines, then to various types of fixed connections such as DSL, coaxial cable, and increasingly fiber and mobile services. Does anyone think that in 2035 we'll be getting the internet via a cable that pops up in your living room and also provides television programs? What increased regulation almost always does is freeze into place existing structures and business models. Certainly that's the case with telephony, where the heavily regulated Bell monopoly fought hard and for a long time very successfully against all sorts of innovation, from alternative methods of long-distance delivery to accessories such as answering machines to letting people know rather than rent their telephones. Communism is a drag, man. Lenny Bruce riffed. It's like a big telephone company. One of the other points that is often raised in net neutrality debates is the United States lags behind foreign countries via virtually any comparison: market penetration, connection speed, cost, you name it. Last November, Brett Swanson, a researcher at the American Enterprise Institute, produced a compelling rebuttal to such arguments, which often relied on misleading data such as advertised maximum speeds rather than actual delivered speeds, and dubious measures of network capabilities and internet traffic as a basic measure of broadband health. Swanson argues that internet traffic volume is an important indicator of broadband health, as it encapsulates and distills the most important broadband factors such as access, coverage, speed, price, and content availability. U.S. internet traffic is 2 to 3 times higher than that of most advanced nations, and the United States generates more internet traffic per capita and per internet user than any major nation except for South Korea. And there's a diagram there. The trust of Swanson's basic argument is also supported by the annual State of the Internet reports produced by cloud computing service Akamai, which typically shows the United States doing well in most comparisons. Nobody loves his or her ISP. I know I don't, and I speak as someone who has dealt with virtually the entire rogues gallery of major players. However, the question isn't simply whether Comcast has the shiftiest customer service in the country. It does. It's whether the company's products are getting better and whether it faces more or less competition based on market forces. And that, to me, is quite possibly the most frustrating aspect of net neutrality and Title II debate. The extent that cable companies once had absolute local monopolies, it was precisely due to local governments granting them that. There are all sorts of things that local, state, and federal governments, not to mention nominally independent agencies such as the FCC, might do to reduce or remove barriers to entry for competitors, as FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai told Reason in an interview released yesterday. There are a lot of markets where consumers want and could use more competition. That's why since I've become the commissioner, I focused on getting rid of some of the regulatory underbrush that stands in the way of some upstart competitors, providing that alternative, streaming local permit rules, getting more wireless infrastructure out there to give a mobile alternative, making sure we have enough spectrum in the commercial marketplace. But these kind of Title II common carrier regulations, ironically, will be completely counterproductive. It's going to sweep a lot of these smaller providers away who simply don't have the ability to comply with all these regulations. And moreover, it's going to deter investment in broadband networks. So, ironically enough, this hypothetical problem that people worry about is going to become worse because of the lack of competition. Pi calls the new rules a solution that won't work to a problem that doesn't exist. I think he's right about that and should give even the most uncritical supporter of the SEC action pause that the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a robust supporter of net neutrality, has seen fit to write a Dear FCC warning. The FCC will evaluate harm based on consideration of 7 factors: impact on competition, impact on innovation, impact on free expression, impact on broadband deployment and investments, whether the actions in question are specific to some applications and not others, whether they comply with the industry best standards and practices, and whether they take place without the awareness of the end user, the internet subscriber. There are several problems with this approach. First, it suggests the FCC believes it has broad authority to pursue any number of practices, hardly the narrow, light touch approach we need to protect the open internet. Second, we worry this rule will be extremely expensive in practice because anyone wanting to bring a complaint will be hard-pressed to predict whether they will succeed. For example, how will the Commission determine industry best standards and practices? As a practical matter, it is likely that only companies that can afford years of litigation to answer these questions will be able to rely on the rule at all. Third, a multi-factor test gives the FCC an awful lot of discretion, potentially giving an unfair advantage to parties with insider influence. Okay, you can read the full article, reason.com. That wasn't the full article. Or actually, yeah, it was. Hey. What we're going to see, though, government having control over the access of internet is going to censor. This is where I think it's going to lead to censoring. Then, let's say they decide that, you know, to be fair, even though you're starting to reach a bigger audience, but the size of your operation should only support this much, because that would, if we allowed you to be able to stream to that many people that quickly, that would be unfair to other companies out there that are that small. Even if the market is deciding that, well, we'd rather watch this person or listen to this person. No. You won't be able to grow. And, you know, I do this broadcast, and if other people have a bigger audience and they need more bandwidth, and they can grow it, I think they should be able to. Just like if mine does. That's not what I do it for, but you always hope that you continue to reach a bigger audience. But this whole fairness thing, with what government will do with it, is only limit people. Who do you think is going to basically make out in that? And people aren't all, there's not a lot of people reading this situation this way, but it's something that I can see that happens with what government is doing. And who would benefit from that? Well, that would be the bigger companies. Well, they're competing with each other, and they're all needing that much bandwidth, so they'll get it. But the little companies that are trying to come up in the game, well, you only got this big of an operation. Well, yeah, but I can't reach more people because of my bandwidth. And, well, you know, you grow your operation. Well, I need to reach more people to keep growing my operation. Well, you know, you got to get bigger before you can reach more people. I can't get bigger if I'm not reaching more people. It'd just be a back and forth, and it'll be the only people I'll be able to do is the people that have money. And if you're someone that's not constantly out there, you know, every 5 minutes promoting products, and you know, I promote products, and it's things that I use personally, so that's one reason I promote them. Two, it's to help, you know, expand the broadcast. But can you imagine what'll happen when, just to get ahead, and net neutrality, it's a really false label, and we know this. What does government do? It gives labels that are opposite of what the bill will actually do. Just think of the FCC. Think of what they do, what they fight against. Again, you know, 8 years for Nipplegate, wardrobe malfunction. And look how much money they spend on it, and look where TV has progressed. There is a lot of stuff on TV that you would have never seen on TV 15 years ago, 20 years ago? Never. But they'll still try to censor other things. And what are we seeing a lot of talk about in the past couple years? Hate speech, bullying. So censorship is just moving to a different place in culture and speech. And you look at FCC, this gives them a ability over the internet that I do not trust. And what they're talking about doing is not what the bill gives them the ability to do. Now, there was one here at tucker.liberty.me, and we have about 4 minutes. Won't be able to read it all, but this is Jeffrey Tucker, net neutrality, triumph of the ruling class, a triumph of free expression and democratic principles. How stupid do they think we are? It's been painful to watch the gradual tightening of government control in the name of net neutrality. The Federal Communications Commission's decision to rewrite the rules and declare the internet a public utility seals the deal. It cartelizes the industry and turns it a Wild West into a planned system of public management, or at least intends to. All the rest is a veneer to cover what it is actually a power grab. The whole plot has had all the usual elements. It's a good name, and its supporters say it's about stopping private and public control. It's had the backing of all the top names in content delivery, from Yahoo to Netflix to Amazon. It's had the quiet support of the leading internet service providers. The decision to impose the rule has been declared by a tiny group of unaccountable bureaucrats operating with the support of the executive lame duck. The opposition, in contrast, has been represented by small players in the industry, hardware providers like Cisco, free market think tanks, and disinterested professors and small group of writers and pundits who know something about freedom and free market economics. The public at large should have been rising up in opposition, but people are largely ignorant of what's going on. Here's what's really going on. The incumbent rulers of the world's most exciting technology have decided to lock down the prevailing market conditions to protect themselves against rising upstarts in a fast-changing market, to impose a new rule against throttling content or using the market price system to allocate bandwidth resources, protects against innovations that would disrupt the status quo. What's being sold as economic fairness and wonderful favor to consumers is actually a sop to industrial giants who are seeking untrammeled access to your wallet and an end to competitive threats to market power. One person I know compared the move to the creation of the Federal Reserve itself, the creation of an industrial cartel in the name of improving the macroeconomic environment. That's a good comparison. Let's back up and grasp the position of the large content providers. Here we see the obvious special interests at work. Netflix, Amazon, and the rest don't want ISPs to charge either them or their consumers for their high bandwidth content. They would rather the ISPs themselves absorb the higher costs of such provisions. It's very clear how getting the government to make price discrimination illegal is in their interest. It means no threats to their business model. By analogy, it's imagined that a retailer furniture company were in position to offload all their shipping costs to the trucking industry. Well, that's all I can do for tonight. Take care, have a great weekend, and stay tuned here on UCY.tv for all the great broadcasts coming up next.
This is Ozzy Skateboard.